Trouble aboard a speeding train, racing through the heart of the Old South. 9 young men whose lives hang in the balance of a court system racked with racial injustice in a nation plagued by social and political turmoil. It sounds like the plot to a movie. Perhaps a movie that's trying to do too much all at once. But what if I told you this isn't the plot to a motion picture? What if I told you it's the actual account of a criminal justice trial that occurred in the small town of Scottsboro, Alabama? Yes, that's right. It's me, Mr. Skanga, and I'm taking you into yet another small town in America's Bible Belt where the nation's attention will once again be riveted. Last time we took one of these little larks, I took you all the way down to Dayton, Tennessee, to watch the Scopes trial. If you thought that was a 3-ring circus, get ready for the Scottsboro trial, which makes that seem orderly by comparison. So, without further ado, let us begin. So now, I want you to answer this question. Is it illegal to ride on a freight train as a passenger without paying? Right? You all see freight trains moving around train yards in different parts of New York City. What if you were to just hop on one? Just, hop on one of the rail cars and ride away on it. Is that something you are legally allowed to do? Or is it illegal? Legal, illegal. If you answered illegal, yes. Absolutely yes. Please keep this in mind, because without this, there's a good deal of idiocy in the opening of this account, which would be lost on you, were you not keeping this fact in mind. So a brawl on a train, because, the best place to get involved in a racially motivated fistfight is definitely on top of a moving vehicle. Especially a moving vehicle that takes over a mile to stop. Well, that's exactly what happened in 1931. So, there's a group of 9 African-American teenagers and a collection of other white men who are all traveling as hobos on the train, because it's the 30s, and everybody has no money. So, all these individuals who are out of work and down on their luck are traveling through the deep south by means of freight train. And when they do, the group of white hobos spots the group of African-American hobos and basically tells them, quote, that this is a white man's train. Well, while it may be possible that a white person was the railroad owner who owned that train, and yes, this was the American South, where African-American and Caucasian Americans did not ride in the same rail cars, it should not be forgotten that it was a freight train. None of them were allowed on board. Not one single solitary one of them belonged on board that thing. But regardless, they settled it in the only way that men already engaged in illegal activity would think to do. They had a fist fight on top of the moving train, which led to the white hobos getting thrown off the train. I mean, literally, they lost that fight and physically were sent rolling off the boxcars. Well, as you might imagine, news of a massive fist fight on top of a freight train tends to attract notice because, let's be honest here, if it happened nowadays, it would definitely go viral. But since this was the 1930s, things didn't really go viral, but they did get the attention of the local sheriff, who moved to stop the freight train so as to arrest the remaining hobos. So the freight train stopped at the nearest station, which happened to be in the small town of Scottsboro, Alabama. So the sheriff gathers up his deputies and he heads out to arrest the 9 African-American hobos for the fracas on the train. All right. So far, so normal. The police roughing up young hobos was not exactly a rare occurrence. police roughing up young African-American men. Not a rare occurrence. So I'm sure you're asking me, okay, Skanga, so why this case of all of them? This sounds like the combination of two normally very cut and dry cases of police brutality from the period. Why are you making us take notes on this? Well, this case turned into anything but typical. And that is when we get a startling accusation. So, sheriff shows up with his armed deputies, and they start arresting these young men. They're aged about 13 to 19. And at this point, two female hobos who were also stowing away on this train. Now, they'd been stowing away inside the boxcar. The gentleman had been riding atop the boxcar. They come out, and they have quite the accusation. They state that they had been sexually assaulted by the 9 young men aboard the train. And naturally, the sheriff places them under arrest, which is kind of what you do when you're a sheriff and someone comes forward with rape accusations. So he places the young men under arrest. There is actually so much animosity at the time that the National Guard has to be called in just to disband a lynch mob that had formed in the town of Scottsboro. This is a rarity in the South, that the lynch mob was not simply allowed to carry out their murder. So instead, this issue will actually proceed to trial. Now, why did the women accuse them of rape? The most likely accusation that's come out in the years since is that, and as we'll explain in later cases, the medical evidence would seem to indicate that no crime took place. What's widely believed by most authorities in the aftermath of the case is that it was a way to distract from the fact that they were also guilty of hoboing on a train, which I should remind all of you is not something you're legally allowed to do. But that it's very possible that they created this account in order to distract from their own crime and focus the sheriff's attention on the other men on the train, which definitively it did. So, the trial. So, none of these young men could actually afford an attorney. Surprise, surprise. If you don't have money for a rail ticket, you probably don't have money lying around for a lawyer. Now, it is tradition nowadays that in fact, it is a legal right nowadays, if you cannot afford legal counsel, one will be provided to you. However, the right to legal counsel was not 100% ironed out then. It was very clear that you had the right to legal counsel, and if you wanted to have a lawyer present, you could. But it was unclear if the state had a duty to provide one to you, and if that lawyer had to necessarily be a lawyer well-versed in criminal justice. In fact, the town did appoint a lawyer, one lawyer for all 9 defendants, and he was a real estate lawyer. Right, so his specialty was mortgage contracts and helping people buy houses. Now, admittedly, there is a place for real estate lawyers. You know, if you're looking to buy a house one day, and I'm sure many of you are, you're probably gonna contact a real estate lawyer at one point. They're a good lawyer to have around, I'll be honest. I have nothing against real estate lawyers. In fact, the father of a young lady I went to school with is a real estate lawyer. But, that being said, a real estate lawyer is definitely not the person you want in your corner when you're going into a criminal trial, especially a criminal trial with capital offenses attached, such as sexual assault. And so this is the case where you really want, 1, your own lawyer, and 2, now at this point, the issue that emerged was this county had a real estate attorney representing all 9 defendants. So, as I said before, a real estate attorney is not the person you want representing you when you're on trial for a capital offense. So, the best this attorney could come up with to advise his clients was for each of them basically to blame the others. So instead of all mutually denying that the sexual assault occurred, all of them were willing to say, for the sake of trying to avoid a harsher penalty, that, oh yes, the others did it. In other words, their defense was, it wasn't me, it was them, right? The other 8 did it, but not me. I wasn't involved in that. The jury, of course, now gets 9 conflicting accounts, wherein the common denominator is the rape occurred, but I didn't do it. But you have another 8 people all saying that you did. Point is, the jury decides to convict the defendants. All of them are convicted. Most received death sentences except for the youngest, because he was 13 at the time. Even as bloodthirsty as the South can be, some of the jurors stopped a little bit short of sentencing a 13-year-old to death. Whether that was whatever. That is what it is. So a plan for an appeal. So the relatives of the young men naturally wanted an appeal. They knew full well their relatives weren't rapists. And they realized this was a sham trial, and they wanted a redo. The problem is getting that done. Now, the International Labor Defense, which is the legal arm of the American Communist Party, came forward and offered the families of these 9 gentlemen their aid in securing a legal defense. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, at the time advised against involvement with the Communist Party, arguing that it would, further bias the jury against these young men by portraying them and the cause of African Americans as something for communist radicals. But the NAACP was thoroughly broke at this point and didn't have the financial powers required to actually undertake the legal defense. Left without really much of a choice, the family agreed to let the Communist Party take over the legal defense of their children. Thus began the campaign of the boys are labeled as the Scottsboro Boys, which helped to kind of emphasize this idea of their youth and innocence. The ILD organized marches and protests across the nation and spread the story across the world. Both communists and non-communists, blacks and whites, were driven to protest the actions of Alabama. For some interesting, you can see some of the protest signs in the background here, where you can see a series of young individuals. One of them says, "Stop lynching, free the Scottsboro Boys. Protest parade and demonstration tonight, 6 p.m., and they're going on. Another says, "Down with lynching of," word I'm not allowed to say, "workers in US of A." And behind it is another sign written in either Spanish or Italian. It's hard to tell. I believe it's Spanish. Behind them, and it says Soviet, and it has the hammer and sickle, the emblem of the Communist Party. And this is so this was a massive cultural legal defense. And the ILD actually does manage to get some things done for these young men. So they appealed the case, and it actually reached the Supreme Court in a case known as Powell versus Alabama. In this case, the Supreme Court overturned the Scottsboro convictions on the grounds that the young men were not given legal counsel, which constituted a violation of the 14th Amendment, which guarantees individuals, regardless of race, equal protection under the law. The Supreme Court ordered retrials. So now it's November of 1932. The saga continues. Retrials. So the retrials were held in the circuit court located in Decatur, Alabama, about 50 miles from the town of Scottsboro. One of the 2 alleged victims actually recanted her accusations and testified for the defense. This is when she says, "No, they didn't rape me," and she agrees to testify to the defense. This is cause. medical examiners were called in to examine the physical evidence taken at the time of the initial arrest and disprove the rape.